Thanks very much. We now open up for discussion. I've already seen one hand up, and that was Bishop Sanchez-Sarando.
Question is for all the economic, and come back a little with the question of Piolena. So, in the encyclical Laudato Si, the Pope quoted Rosmin, a philosopher, German philosopher Guardini, and said that the technocratic paradigm use all this technology not as mean to the common good or to the development of the human person, but to the power, to have more power and money. And we can say that this observation of Guardini is right or not?
Do you want me to say something?
Yes.
Greg, do you want me to?
Yes, please.
It's a long-standing debate. There were times when the combine harvester was considered the worst invention ever, and dismantling people of their work who were no longer working with the sickle to harvest the corn. I think since the Industrial Revolution and the transformation of agriculture, we have the debate that technological innovation has winners and losers, and we will have this again here. I don't actually see it as dramatic as from the technical innovations which we had so far, which have essentially brought employment of people in agriculture in our industrialized or in our now industrialized countries down from 80% to 3% of the labor force. That's a huge transformation. Is the profit motive behind robotics and AI? I don't think only profit motive. We need to get public investments. That's why I was pointing at the role of development assistance investments and public research investments to get moving for investments in the public good, so that the things which Mr. Hirzinger mentioned, helping the aged, if this is not a market, it will be too slow. Getting dirty jobs replaced will not be quick enough, and the opportunities are lost. Marcelo, so I see a lot of opportunity of improving livelihoods and work conditions of poor people through robotics and AI, but we should not assume it will be a smooth transition. It will be as rough, probably, as the earlier transformation towards industrialization.
Stefan.
Thank you. I have a couple of remarks to both papers. Now, to what you said, Becker, in your conclusion, you are actually referring to the Rybczynski-Samuelson theorem. Now, what robotics has nullified, it's a theorem which all the students of economics in the world until 20, 30 years ago believed as a dogma of faith, you say, because that is the real point. But why is it the case that, for instance, you represent OECD, and, well, you work there, and similar institutions, why they still continue to base their analysis and their proposals on that theorem, which does not hold any longer? And your conclusion, which I liked it very much, the risk of a deindustrialization in the emerging countries is today the major factor determining migratory flows. And so in the Western world, we complain that we have migrants, but we never go to fix attention to the major cause of that. And that is connected to the way our so-called rich countries organize their productivity. That is a really serious contradiction, you see. So if you could start saying, look, that theorem does not hold any longer, hence, because you see, that theorem, as you know, was at the basis after the Second World War, the Bretton Woods of the constitution of GATT and then WTO, etc. So now we need to modify the status of WTO on the, if what you said is correct, and I believe that you are right, you are correct. So try to move a step forward. Now, to Joachim, in particular, I have liked very much your presentation with specific reference to the issue of employment. You correctly said that displacement effect due to automation, etc., is countered by scale and productivity effect. But you know very well, I'm sure, that these countervailing effects are incomplete and they are not simultaneous. So there is, in other words, automation increases output per worker more than wages, and so reduces the share of labor in national income. And that is, in fact, one of the reasons why inequalities are increasing instead of decreasing. Inequalities, not poverties, because one thing is poverty, another thing is inequality. And your final remark, namely that robots are subsidized and labor is not subsidized, is really important. You will certainly remember that a few years ago, a man like Bill Gates, Microsoft, proposed to tax robots. And everybody said, oh, this must be crazy. No, of course it was an intellectual provocation, but he was exactly referring to that. In other words, our governments in the West, so-called Western world, we subsidize, we finance robots, and we charge taxation, have more and more taxes on labor. And so the result is what we are observing. So again, what you said, it's relevant if you really want, as Pope Francis continue to preach, insisting to modify the rules of the game. Because it is impossible to talk about fourth industrial revolution, or robotization, digitalization, without also considering the impacts on the institutional framework, namely, in this particular case, the fiscal system. Because the fiscal system is part of the game which should be changed. On the other hand, we continue to maintain the fiscal system typical of the second industrial revolution, without considering that we have entered into the fourth industrial revolution. So I would be curious to have your comments on that.
We can take a comment from each presenter, but very short, minute and a half each.
Okay.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll take it.
Okay.
We'll take two
Very brief.
quick response and then questions. Yeah.
Stefano, I fully agree. There are different time frames for scale and productivity effects, and they need to be addressed by expanded and improved social safety net systems. Do we get them? Yes. Most developing countries have scaled up their social security systems. China and India, their rural health systems, not bad. And, but that needs to be scaled up much faster, much better. And the poor need to be better informed, and that's where digitization can also play a role so that they can make their choices.
Would you like?
Yeah, I just want to come back on the point of the deindustrialization of emerging economies. That's exactly what you're seeing right now, and Danny Roderick has developed a nice theory about that, calling premature premature deindustrialization, and you see that happening. About the rules of the game and the OECD, let me say that there is a lot of discussion within the OECD also specifically on that. That's also one of the reasons I think that a lot of the international organizations are also going through a crisis these days, specifically on the fiscal system. OECD is trying to do a lot on that, specifically within G20, where we're trying to tackle also fiscal system specifically of multinational enterprises. Is it enough? Probably not enough. But we hope that by pushing there, we're moving towards a better solution.
We have time now for two short questions. Pierre?
In your simulation of the role of robotics in the future, did you account various models for carbon footprint, and how does that impact your predictions?
M.A.?
Thank you for both of the presentations. I just wanted to give a few quick questions or provocations for the presentation on the impact for poverty. The first was, I wonder how the creation of data centers, so with machine learning, we know that we have to label images, and these huge data centers to do that are often happening in poorer countries, giving these individuals jobs, but the quality of the jobs is, of course, up for debate. So I wonder where that discussion would fit into your framework in terms of creating employment, but looking at the quality of the employment created. And then I also wanted to ask a question about, again, this balancing of values. So while I agree that a lot of the solutions that you presented were good, right, that the banking options for lower-income individuals or the identification of poor communities via machine learning, there is still these sort of tensions in values, that for the banking options, will there be the same problems that we have in the use of machine learning for our banks, right? If you're rejected for a mortgage or a loan, we often don't know why, right? What are the metrics actually used? And so for individuals who already don't have a voice, will this be exacerbated? Also, the identification of poor individuals, we see with using machine learning in humanitarian context that the poor communities can be this information could be used by malicious groups. So the privacy and the security of the data when you can identify a community, how would you factor that in?
The time allocated for the discussion in the papers is now up. So I propose that the replies be given in the discussion period that will follow.